and thank everybody here for the opportunity to come and speak to you about this amazing history that I have become very passionate about of late, and that is so important as a Virginian to know and understand that Virginia is just the epicenter of the CCC. Everything about it started right here, right in our own backyard at Camp Roosevelt. So you're going to learn about that. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk to you first about the history of the CCC as a whole, and then I'm going to focus the last half of my presentation on Camp Roosevelt itself. So as you can see from this first slide, this of Roosevelt's Tree Army and America's first nationwide conservation movement. Prior to the advent of the CCC, there were conservation efforts across the country. The national parks had been started, the national forests were being developed, and there were laws that were passed to preserve our public lands. But it wasn't enough. And there were so many things about that you're going to learn about here about our environment that were really falling apart. Okay. So when President Franklin Roosevelt took office in 1933, he faced a nation that was in the country that was bankrupt in both money and spirit, whose people were unemployed, hungry, and without hope. The Great Depression lasted from 1929 to 1939, ending with the start of World War II. 1 in 4 people, or 13 to 15 million at that point, including farmers, were unemployed. Just to compare, today in our country, the unemployment rate is between 4 and 4.5%. So we think that's bad. It was really bad then. 3/4 of the unemployed families needed assistance and were living in poverty. Today, we have a 10.6% poverty rate in our country. Again, a far cry from what it was then. 40% of America's farms went on the auction block. Many schools were closed or cut back hours. And this I thought was a really interesting excerpt from a letter that a student wrote to President Roosevelt's wife, Eleanor. "Dear Mrs. Roosevelt, would you have any food or raiment to wear?" People were desperate. The environmental disasters, along with the crushing unemployment and poverty, the nation experienced extraordinary environmental disasters. Among them were numerous wildfires, drought, dust storms, that's what the Dust Bowl days were happening, uncontrolled floods, and the American chestnut blight. While Congress debated about the Dust Bowl, there was a man named Hugh Bennett who was a researcher and administrator for the U.S. Bureau of Soils Department, and he knew food-producing farmlands were so endangered that the nation's food supply was being impacted. While he was preparing to testify before Congress about the need to restore the farmlands, one of his aides told him that the dust storm from the west was going to be hitting Washington about the same time that he was giving his talk. And as he was finishing his remarks, sure enough, the dust storm from the west descended on Washington, so they got their brief. Then, at the same time, the American chestnut blight was peaking. As you may know, the chestnut blight was a fungal disease that came here on trees that were imported from Asia, and the fungus was dispersed in spores, air, raindrops, animals, and spread to the underlying cambium of the tree, cut off their nutrients, and killed the trees. And by the 1920s and 40s, it had devastated the entire chestnut population of the East Coast. And the environmental impact was huge because, as you know, or may not know, many of the rural communities in this area and all up and down the east where chestnut trees were prevalent depended on the chestnuts for their economy. They fed their livestock, especially pigs. They sold the chestnuts and they harvested the timber. And so when the chestnut trees, which were the most prevalent tree in all of the eastern wood, the most prevalent deciduous tree in all the eastern woods, when they died off, it was devastating. And so when they died, they not only ruined the economy for the chestnut trees themselves and the nuts that they produced, but the erosion started happening hugely because it was the tree roots disappeared, there was rot, and there was nothing to hold back the soil. So, and until more trees grew up to replace them, that was a terrible disaster. So the New Deal programs were instituted by FDR. He created bold changes and energized the economy to restore the environment. On March 31st, 1933, FDR signed the National Emergency Conservation Work Act that created the Civilian Conservation Corps and brought together two wasted resources, young men and the land. Because of depression, so many people were out of work. There were men in the streets, red lines, everything was just, it was just such a terrible time in our country. So the first CC camp was established at George Washington National Forest in Fort Valley and opened on April 17th, 1933. And there was a woman as the first female U.S. cabinet member. I can't not speak about her. And she was the Secretary of Labor from 1933 to 1945. Frances Perkins was her name. She was the primary architect and champion of the CCC. She played a key role in developing the program, brilliantly presenting to Congress as a relief program the benefits of the CCC. There was a big job to do. A lot of organization had to take place in the They had to figure out how to organize it, how to enroll the workers, and it was no easy task. Robert Fechner, a Boston labor leader, was appointed the national director by Executive Order 1601 on April 5th, 1933. And he established all the rules and regulations, allocated the funds, approved the establishment of camps, and was in general responsible for the overall operation of the camps. Sadly, he was also quite a racist. There was a congressman, Oscar Dupree of Illinois, who was the first African-American congressman who was appointed in the 20th century. And he stated in the rules leading up to the development of the CCC that there was to be no discrimination according to race, creed, or color in the CCC enrollment process. But Robert Fechner disagreed, and he said separate was not unequal, and he adhered to strict segregationist views, and therefore the camps, primarily in the South, but in other places too, were segregated at that time. And that is when we got Camp Wolf Gap on the western part of Shenandoah County, which was after its first year an all African-American camp. So little is known about it. When I heard about it a few years ago, I was like, what? I knew the Wolf Gap Recreation Area was there, but that's the site of that CCC camp. The first year it was a white camp, and then when they decided they needed to segregate, they had to bring a bunch of African-American young men from the Baltimore area and Washington, D.C., and all around to populate it with African-Americans who then were at the camp for many years. But it happened fast. The CCC development was only 37 days in the making between when the law was passed and the first camp opened. The speed with which the plan moved through proposal, authorization, implementation, and operation was nothing short of a miracle. As we all know today, when you see how Congress operates, a miracle of cooperation among all branches and agencies of the federal government. It was a mobilization of men, material, and transportation on a scale never before seen in time of peace. From his inauguration on March 4th, 1933, to the induction of the first enrollee on April 7th, only 37 days. Think of it, 37 days, just a little over a month. So who were the CCC boys? And that's what they were called. They were called the CCC boys. They had to be young men between the ages of 17 and 25, unmarried, out of school, and unemployed. It wasn't hard to find them. They were everywhere. They had to live in assigned camps throughout the nation. So they may have been taken from all over, many different locations, and brought to the different camps around the country. They could serve up to 2 years. They were paid $30 a month. They were also called the $1 a day boys. And $25 of that $30 was sent home to their families. And this was such a brilliant thing that they did by doing that. They infused cash into every community, every family that these boys came from, and every community across the country got an infusion of cash from the pay that these boys were getting. and their families were able to buy goods. The local businesses thrived because people had money again in their pockets. Um, the places where the camps rose up, the communities around them thrived because they were supplying the camps with food and equipment and all kinds of resources. So it was just an amazing revitalization program. It was genius. Their job was to provide the manpower for national infrastructure projects designed by various government agencies. The benefits of these camp and structure of the camps. The men were taken off the streets and traveled far from home to perform useful work in a healthy environment. Over 110,000 illiterates learned to read and write. So they had schools in these camps and instruction in the evenings after the camps. They did all their work. Those who wanted to take classes could sign up for all types of classes, in addition to the skills they were learning as workers. The men worked 40-hour, 6-day weeks and crews of 48. So there may have been hundreds of men in the camp, but they were broken up into crews of 48 and taken out to do different jobs. Each crew had a leader and an assistant leader who were in charge of the barracks and on the job. These men received $45 and $36 a month, respectively. There were 16 local experienced men, or called LEMs or LIMs. They were hired from the areas surrounding the camps and helped inexperienced crews learn necessary skills. So they were hiring blacksmiths and carpenters and all kinds of construction workers and people that had know-how, mature men who were not of the age of the CCC boys, but who could come in and be their trainers. The group foreman attended a CCC training school and then was assigned to a camp as part of its technical staff, and they were paid $140 a month to serve as on-the-job supervisors. So they were really happy to be getting that money. Each camp also had a superintendent and Army officers responsible for the day-to-day operations. So understand that the camps were designed in a military format, and the military ran the camps, but the U.S. Forest Service ran the programs, oversaw the projects. Each man was given food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. Their term of enrollment lasted anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, and they gained anywhere from 12 to 30 pounds during their enrollment. And the longer they stayed, the more weight they gained, because these boys were not used to 3 square meals a day. They were fed really well. They were given clean clothes and shoes and a bed to sleep in. So it was remarkable. So how was it organized? The U.S. was broken up into 9 military districts, each one with its distinct environment and topography and challenges. And FEMA still utilizes this organizational map today. Our country still has these 9 districts that operate when there's a national disaster. How big was it? From its establishment, March 30th, 1933 until 1942, over 4,200 camps were established. So you can see this map kind of gives you an idea of the density. The more populated the area was, and the areas along the coast, and especially in the east, had many more camps because there was more going on. In the Midwest and the deserts west, there weren't as many because there wasn't as much need. Camps were established in the U.S., Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and Guam, and the Philippines adopted a similar program that operated there. There were 184 camps in the state of Virginia alone, and Virginia ranked 4th in the nation for total numbers of camps. The CCC employed over 3.5 million men in its 9-year history. Of the 3.5 million employed, 200,000 were African American and over 80,000 were indigenous, as well as other ethnicities. The camps, one other thing I want to say about that is the camps outside the South and some of the places, that we're still struggling through the Civil War remembrances. Out west, there was no discrimination. Those camps were segregated. There was all types of diversity present in many of those camps. So what did they do? They did a lot. Over 800 state and national parks were created or upgraded by the CCCs. Their work included extensive reforestation, erosion control, and campground construction. So Our own Shenandoah National Park here in our backyard was established, and the road Skyline Drive entirely built by the CCC. Some structures in particular are still standing and are still utilized today. When they constructed Skyline Drive, most of the Skyline Drive, because it had been inhabited, that whole area, Shenandoah National Park, had been inhabited by mountain people, that they had to move out. The government bought them out, moved them off the mountain. It's kind of another story to talk about. But the chestnut blight had hit them hard. There were not very many trees. So all along the Skyline Drive, what you see today, most of that was planted artificially with native plantings and trees that were brought in and planted there by the CCC. So the ones that were planted, some of the trees are huge now, of course, because they're getting close to 100 years old. But many of the plantings and all of the shrubbery and everything along the Skyline Drive, most of it was originally planted by the CCC because there was nothing there. They constructed roads, bridges, and trails between 1933 and 42. The CCC's unified the Appalachian Trail on the East Coast. It was spotty, but they connected the whole thing. They also constructed or repaired over 125,000 miles of roads, 45,000 buildings and bridges. They fought fires and helped with drought control, drought relief, disaster relief, earthquakes, fires, you name it. Wolf Gap Camp fought a lot of forest fires, and they helped when there were disastrous floods. They came in and helped in all kinds of relief efforts. And restoring and planting all the trees that they planted helped with soil erosion and restoration of farmlands. They also put in a lot of rural telephone lines. Shintel today operates on the lines that were started by the CCC, in particular Camp Wolf Gap plant, or established a lot of those original phone lines that were laid for our current infrastructure. It's amazing what they did. So now that brings us to our backyard, Camp Roosevelt. So I'm sorry this slide is a little blurry. I had to enlarge it from something on another photo. But I want to read to you, before I get started on this, an excerpt that came from a speech given by a man named George Dant, who was one of the original enrollees at Camp Roosevelt. We're coming up on a 100-year anniversary of the CCCs in 2033. So I understand that most of the alumni, the original workers, are gone, just like World War II vets. They're gone. Okay, I don't know that there's any alive today. There may be one or two that are quite elderly who may be enrolled later in the years of the CCC. But they used to have big reunions, and they used to have reunions up at Shenandoah National Park every year for CCC alumni who worked there. So this gentleman was part of Camp Roosevelt. He was in the first contingency of men at Camp Roosevelt. He gave this speech in 1991 when he came to one of the reunions. So this is just an excerpt that I think you'll find really interesting. It was late afternoon when approximately 200 men walked to the crest of the mountain just above Camp Roosevelt. Looking down the road, there was nothing but open sky and one single canvas-covered army truck in a 10-acre clearing. The local mountain and townspeople were standing around the fringes of the newly cleared area. They had come from Preston Hollow, Edinburgh, Mount Jackson, and Luray, and as far away as Newmarket. These folks waited for something to happen, and they would be disappointed, as the CC boys straggling in had just pushed their Greyhound buses to the crest of the mountain, and this is the mountain coming from Luray, okay? And many had never before even been in the mountains. The supply convoy had become separated and lost. The supply trucks had taken the valley road looking for Luray that couldn't find it in the Edinburgh Mount Jackson area. The single truck in the clearing contained only folded canvas army cots. There was no food, water, blankets, tents, or shelter, except for what the Forest Service people brought with them, and there wasn't enough to go around, so no one used it. The young men had been up since 4:30 a.m., had breakfast at 5 a.m. The chartered buses were late and did not depart Fort Washington, Maryland until 9 a.m. A brown bag lunch had been provided consisting of a bologna sandwich, a hard-boiled egg, and a cookie. This was before C rations were invented. Soon after the men arrived, the mess officer Sergeant Moose and the cook Max Potkin drove up in private automobiles. They quickly grasped the situation and retreated towards town in search of the missing trucks, especially those related to food and cooking facilities. The men had nothing to do but set up the cots and wait. Then the weather took a turn, and soon rain and lightning filled the skies. The boys looked to their duffel bags for rain or overcoats as the area they sat in had been cleared of all foliage. In early evening, a truck arrived with lanterns and low-voltage battery lights. Sergeant Moose returned after virtually clearing out of the towns all their hot dogs, hamburgers, and salmon and bread. Around midnight, a large van arrived with blankets and tents. The storm had subsided long enough to unload the blankets and tents. During the next few days, many of the boys who had wandered away the first day returned in a variety of conveyances. Some in private vehicles of still curious locals, some in supply trucks or military vehicles, and some were brought in by the local sheriffs. The entire cleared area was a lake of mud. Constant movement of personnel and continued rain created a black, soupy substance. Field stoves were covered with leaking tarps. Cooks were wet to the skin. Personnel were deserting. Water had to be hauled from Passage Creek as no well had been drilled. The water was from blister bags containing chlorine. The latrines were uncovered, open straddle trenches. It was debatable whether the rain or personnel would fill them first. So that was the first night, the first day that these guys had, but things got better, okay? They did get better. And so you can see that they got the tents set up, they got the camp. This was done in one day, okay? They had this camp. I think they were desperate. By the time they got all the trucks in with all the supplies, they were in a hurry to get moving and get it done so they wouldn't have to spend another miserable night. And many people, curiosity seekers as well as media, came to see what would go on and to capture this event because it was monumental. And I said some of this stuff before. Roosevelt signed that order on April 7th, but on April 17th, things were started here. And an early morning departure from Fort Washington, Maryland, as I said, ended late in the day. They had many obstacles, food supply trucks and equipment, mud. They had a heck of a start. And they had to travel by foot the rest of the way to get there. With speed and efficiency, Army personnel built a community of tents, and Camp Roosevelt became a reality. So again, this is a picture from day 2 on April 18th. Quite a difference. So the camps were really small communities. They had many buildings, and these are pictures all from Camp Roosevelt. They had working areas, they had sleeping quarters, eating mess halls, recreation facilities, camp operations buildings. They had a clinic, garages, blacksmith shop, tool sheds, and other buildings that made up their camp life. They had a parade field because, again, they were run on a military-style format. And they had company streets, they called them, throughout the camp that connected the buildings. And you can still walk these paths if you go to the Camp Roosevelt Recreation Area today. They had reveille and retreat each morning and evening. And these men that you see taking down the flag were wearing their dress uniforms because they were required to dress for supper. So it was quite something. They learned so much discipline, these young men who really had nothing like this ever in their lives. No examples of this. The commanding officer, Captain Leo Donovan, was assigned as camp commander, and daily camp activities and care of enrollees, again, as I said, came under the care of the military. This was their headquarters building, a military center of daily logistics. And the interior of that building showed that there were administrative duties that were conducted, and these were the company commander and company clerk who were paid more. They had a headquarters for the U.S. Forest Service there as well, because the work projects were all planned by the Forest Service. Superintendent Jim Wilkins. Who's been to Wilkins Shoe Center in Winchester or heard of it? Okay, so this is the gentleman that started Wilkins Shoe Center. Jim Wilkins was the project superintendent for many years. He managed and organized the work performed by the CCC. And I just want to say, Jim Wilkins was quite a remarkable man. He not only, after he got out of the CCC, was in World War II and fought. When he came back, he was from the Winchester area, and he started many things. He was in real estate development. He started Shenandoah University, and his family still gives huge endowments to Shenandoah University today. And his son, daughter, Donna Wilkins Downing, I don't know if any of you know of them, they contributed a lot of money to the CCC Legacy Organization that I'm going to talk about later to help start the interpretive center that is being developed at the U.S. Forest Service office in Edinburgh. And I'll talk about that a little later on. But just wanted you to know he was quite a person, and just did so much for not only those men, but just our country in general, and especially our local community. This was what the barracks looked like on the inside. They were military style. Each building held between 45 and 70 men. There were 6 barracks at Camp Roosevelt, and they gathered in their barracks in the off hours, and the barracks were inspected weekly, just like they would be in the military. They had to keep them shipshape. Henry Rich was the first CCC enrollee in America. He was from Washington, D.C., and he heard about the CCC on the radio, and he enrolled. He served for 4 years as a camp cook, and then was promoted to a leader, and he married a girl from Edinburgh, and they lived on Water Street. Tools were really critical, and Tool Shed was the first building they put up of all the buildings. They had to take really good care of their tools because they relied on them to do all of their projects, and they weren't easy to come by. So Camp Roosevelt was also known as Company 322, and they were awarded the best company at one point. They were always competing, the camps, to try to win this award. I'm not sure what criteria they had to meet to win. This is a picture of the administration building and the officers' sleeping quarters. They also had a hospital and a day room in the same long building. They had a pump house, and it contained the pump that dispersed the water to all of the buildings. They set up quite a remarkable pumping facility there to bring water and supply all of the boys with all the water they needed to keep clean, because they were required to bathe every day when they came off of their jobs. And they had a mess hall that was also the hub of activity. They held dances. They really loved to get girls to come in from the local communities and entertain them with the thought of romance, I guess. They had education classes and other events in these buildings. They had a rec hall where they played games, ping-pong. They played, cards, and they read, and they enjoyed each other's company during their free time. So this leads us to the modern day Camp Roosevelt. And before I get to anything else here, I want to hopefully show you a video. Let me see if I can pull it up. Hopefully I can. And you'll actually be able to see it.
The story of Camp Roosevelt is important to our nation and to our conservation heritage because in 1929 we had a Great Depression where we had 25% unemployment, especially in our urban areas, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted to help the people of the United States. So he enacted legislation called the New Deal. And one of the New Deal components, probably one of the most successful New Deal programs, was the Civilian Conservation Corps. In order to enact the Civilian Conservation Corps, he enlisted the help of federal agencies, the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, state parks, other land management agencies to host Civilian Conservation Corps camps. Camp Roosevelt, because we're located 70 miles from Washington, D.C., was the location of the first Civilian Conservation Corps camp in the nation. On April 17th, 1933, the first enrollees came over the mountain on foot because their buses were mired in mud after heavy rains, and they entered the location of Camp Roosevelt. Now, imagine that this area was completely undeveloped. The first thing the boys had to do was build their camp. And they did that in mud, they did that in snow, and they had to erect their own tents, they had to start erecting their own buildings. So if we were to take a day in the life of a CCC enrollee, what we would find is that the camps were actually run by the military, Quartermaster Corps. So if you were a CCC enrollee, you would have been housed and fed by the military. Many of the young men who came to the camps learned job skills. They were first taught to read and write, and then they may have learned blacksmithing, carpentry, and driving. They all wanted to learn to drive a truck, and that was the most popular class throughout the camp. They usually were in the Civilian Conservation Corps for approximately 6 months. That was their tour of duty. When they left the camps, they had a job skill. They gained an average of 12 pounds. These folks had been starving. They had never had new clothes. They hadn't had a lot to eat because of the Depression. So coming to the Civilian Conservation Corps camps, it was an amazing kind of a bump to the economy, to the nation as a whole. One young man loved Camp Roosevelt so much that he actually petitioned the Forest Service and the powers above, Department of Agriculture, to establish Camp Roosevelt as a recreation area. So in 1965, Camp Roosevelt became what it is today, a recreation area for future generations to use. As you explore the George Washington and Jefferson National Forests, one of the things that I love to think about is that many of the roads, many of the trails, many of the trees that you see were actually improved on, built, or planted by the Civilian Conservation Corps. Today, as you explore Camp Roosevelt, you can take an interpretive walk. There are 15 interpretive signs that will show you what the buildings look like when the camp was in operation, and then you find the remnants of the old buildings, the foundations. And what you want to do is take a close look at those foundations, though, because to me, they're absolutely phenomenal. You see the stone masonry that are in the foundations, which survives, and it survives for over 85 years. It's kind of a forgotten history, the reason being that the Civilian Conservation Corps has never really been taken off the books. We have a modern Climate Conservation Corps, we have modern Civilian Conservation Corps, which are made up of youths, which now happen to be male and female. The Civilian Conservation Corps was only for young men, and they do similar work. We can really trace back our heritage of stewardship to the young men in the Civilian Conservation Corps and the excellent work that they provided the nation in a time of need.
Okay, so very interesting. And I'm so thankful that we live here where we can just go visit Camp Roosevelt anytime we want to when it's open. You can go in there even when the gates close. I'll take a question in just a minute. I just have like 3 more slides and I'll be ready to take questions. So in Edinburgh, at the U.S. Forest Service office, which is well hidden, have any of you ever visited the U.S. Forest? Oh, good. So it's on Coos Street. If you turn off of Route 11 onto Stony Creek Road in Edinburgh, cross the railroad track, there's the bank on the right, and there's a car wash. And the road between the bank and the car wash, turn down that road. It's also the way that you get to the park. Partway down that road, you'll see a little sign on the right. It says U.S. Forest Service, and that's Coot Street. You go down that road and go all the way to the end, and you'll come to the Forest Service building. And you will see there a commemorative wall that was erected to honor the CCC boys. And you'll see one of the CCC worker statues. So these worker statues were originally known as the CCC boys called them Iron Mike, or they were called Iron Mike, but it's now officially the CCC worker statue. And there's one of those at the U.S. Forest Service office in Edinburgh. There's one up at Big Meadows at the Visitor Center, at Bird Visitor Center. There are many others, over 76 of them now throughout the country that have been placed in state parks and national parks and other recreation areas. So I want you to know that you can get involved. I brought a publication that I hope you'll take some of. And if you visit our website, which is ccclegacy.org, you will find all kinds of information there. I want to just say that the website is being rebuilt, and soon it'll have a whole new look and so many new features. All the old features will still be there, all the information, but there's tons of history. There's information about all of the camps that were across the country, and photos and lots of things if you're interested in knowing more. You can become a member of the CCC Legacy organization if you want. I brought some membership forms. You could also go to the website and sign up. It's $35 a year. For that, you receive quarterly and annual publications and voting rights for the election, and ability to attend our annual membership meeting and find out what's going on. We also have a Facebook page that you're free to join. Civilian Conservation for Legacy is what it's called. You look for that yellow circle that says CCC Legacy, because there's several other CCC website Facebook pages that's not the same one. Donations, and you're invited to visit the James R. Wilkins Senior Interpretive Center that's currently at the U.S. Forest Service office. It's under construction, but visitors can go there and see what's there so far. It was started many years ago, and then it kind of lay fallow because of some issues with the agreement with the Forest Service, and then COVID hit, and the organization kind of petered. And so we're now back up to a full 9-member board, and we're working hard to revitalize this organization and get this interpretive center completed. And this is the Legacy's emblem you can see this logo when you go to the Facebook page, and that's it.